Hello and welcome to the Lex Autolease Budget 2016 webinar. Thank you for joining us. I'm Penny Haslam and I'll be your host for this session. We're talking to Lex Autolease Principal Consultant Chris Chandler. Hello Chris, thanks for joining us.
Hi Penny.
And we'll of course be discussing the tax and legislative updates for company vehicles from the latest budget to help you understand and navigate these changes. And afterwards we open up the discussion and take some of your questions. So please make sure you stay online for that. And to submit your question throughout the webinar, enter them via the text box just below us on your screen. Now, Chris, it's fair to say, isn't it, that Lex Autolease is the UK's leading leasing and fleet management company. That's right, isn't it? You're pretty substantial.
Absolutely. Within the UK, we have approximately 317,000 vehicles on our fleet, and last year we were responsible for 1 in 30 vehicle registrations within the UK. So we're a large operator, and that enables us to have a consultancy team such as the one that I reside in, and we have tax experts, management accountants, qualified people, and also people who've got a lot of experience in the operation, financing and management of fleets of vehicles. So we're able to use that expertise to assist our customers and also to provide thought leadership and reference information such as our white papers and guides, and obviously this budget webinar.
Well, it's good that you've got the resources to drill into what the budget had to offer, because it wasn't much, was it? It was sugar tax for the headlines, but for the rest of us, the headlines were a little bit below the line. Talk to me about the fuel duty, because that's remained the same for the last 6 years, hasn't it?
Absolutely, it has. Almost unprecedented to see fuel duty to have 6 years of zero increase when it used to go up in line with sort of RPI. So we've had quite a long respite, and now we've been given another 12 months from George Osborne, which will help businesses be cost effective, because obviously fuel cost is a significant cost for fleet operators.
It's astonishing, isn't it? It's been frozen for the last 6 years, a record duration of period in time which it's stayed frozen. Is this something that businesses can begin to rely on, or do they have to think a little bit more nimbly in the future about changes?
Yeah. Well, I think if you look historically, duty always used to go up. As you say, 6 years with no duty increases is unprecedented. So I think it's good relief for businesses. It's good to see the duty hasn't increased, but you have to be prepared for those increases to come. So controlling fuel bills is a very important activity for fleet operators.
Now, in terms of the capital allowance for business cars, the current CO2 emission is 130 grams per kilometre. But in 2018, that comes down to 110 grams. Can you explain what impact that might have on businesses?
Yeah, as you rightly say, the threshold is coming down to 110 grams per kilometre, but we've got good warning. It's coming in April 2018. And to be honest, a lot of our customers are already well on the way to 110 gram per kilometre as a fleet average anyway. So although there will be an impact for those who aren't operating the cleaner fleets, for us, we believe by 2018 it's not going to be a big issue for fleets, because they're already heading in that direction with regards to emissions.
So the whole industry is moving towards lower emissions, and businesses are working on this. That's good news, isn't it?
It is, and we've had 10 years of significant reduction in CO2 within the industry, and now we're seeing more alternatively fuelled vehicles and ultra-low emission vehicles coming onto fleets. So for us, we've got over 4,500 plug-in vehicles on our fleets, and last month we've taken on our first hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. So the industry is adopting these lower CO2 technologies.
So the impact on our audience watching today shouldn't be that great, should it? Although it sounded like a shock announcement, a big drop from 130 to 110, it's not going to cause too many sleepless nights.
Well, absolutely, and for our customers, we've been working with them for many years, helping them reduce their carbon emissions. which helps reduce their tax and makes their fleets more sustainable. So we've been doing a lot of this work with them, and we predicted that it would go down to 110 grams per kilometre soon. So they're in good shape. Obviously, those who aren't looking at ultra-low CO2 emission vehicles and lowering their CO2 will have a cost premium coming their way.
Now, Chris, the 100% first year writing down allowance has also seen a change to its CO2 threshold, hasn't it? It's confirmed it will remain until at least 2021. Is this a key point for fleets as well?
It's always good to have advance notification of where these thresholds and where this taxation is going for future planning for fleets. With regards to the 100% writing down allowances though, the threshold is moving from 75 grams per kilometre down to 50 grams per kilometre. Again, that was an expected move. It won't have a massive impact on the fleet and leasing industry because it applies to vehicles that are purchased outright, and the majority of the fleet industry leases its vehicles. So it will have an impact on those vehicles, but for the fleet industry overall, it will have minimum impact. Most people lease because of operational benefits and VAT tax savings.
So no great savings for fleets then?
Not really, and it will only apply to the very cleanest vehicles as well.
Okay.
So it's a useful announcement that that's moving and giving us notification, but not a big shake-up for the industry.
Okay, well, let's move on to company car tax changes. It's now confirmed that the 3% diesel supplement differential will be retained. What does this mean for diesel customers?
Okay, for company car drivers who are in diesel cars, they were expecting to see a 1% reduction in their company car tax in 2016-17 tax year. What this means is that the 3% diesel supplement is going to remain until 2020, so they're actually going to have a 2% increase in their company car tax, which is at the same rate, 2% increase, as petrol drivers will see.
And what about drivers who've taken free fuel for private use policies?
Yes, free fuel for private use is an interesting one because a lot of drivers may take that under the view of it's hassle-free and also that they're protected from fuel price increases. But in fact, what actually happens is the tax increases year on year, but this year they actually get a bit of a double whammy because the tax on their free fuel for private use has gone up while the price of fuel is falling. So this means that free fuel for private use is even less of a benefit for many employees and quite an expensive benefit for employers. So we believe that now is a very good time for companies to do a review of the cost effectiveness of this benefit, and to our customers we recommend getting in contact with consultancy because it can be a bit complicated and we can help walk them through this.
Yeah, is it worth doing it at all?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's great. Now remember, if you have any questions, please do keep submitting them in the box below and we'll do our best to answer them in the Q&A that's coming up shortly. Now Chris, company car tax will also continue to be based on CO2 emissions until 2021. That's giving us 5 years planning ahead. Does that help fleet managers in the same way as capital allowances reductions?
Absolutely. Knowing that going forwards we're going to be CO2 based taxation for the foreseeable future is a great help. There's been uncertainty within the industry about where taxation might go, so this allows fleet managers and fleet operators to plan the type of vehicles that they're going to have on their fleets with more certainty. Our customers are already working well with the CO2 systems. We're able to provide advice on that, and so knowing that tax, writing down allowances and also grant funding is all pointing at ultra-low emission vehicles gives us some certainty with regards to how we plan for the future.
And the government's also announced that it will be consulting on ultra-low emissions bans beyond 2020. What do you recommend companies do to prepare for that?
They need to keep an eye on where the consultation's going, understand what the government's going to be doing with those thresholds and making sure that they're in the best shape possible over the next 5 years to minimise the impact of those tax increases.
Well, there you have it. Ultra low emissions is the way forward. What about lease rental restrictions though, Chris? The 15% flat rate restriction in corporation tax relief for leased cars over 130 grams per kilometre.
Yes, currently that stands, as you say, at 130 grams per kilometre. We believe that it will probably go down to 110 grams per kilometre in 2018, as the other writing down thresholds have, but there's been no announcement as yet. So logically, be prepared for it, but the Chancellor hasn't said anything as yet. As far as impact's concerned, it'll be similar to the other allowance thresholds. We can see that it's really a natural progression in line with the way emissions are going overall within our industry.
So Chris, let's just move on to the wider issue that viewers may want to know more about. Is lease accounting, is it affected by the budget changes?
Okay, there were no specific changes within the budget, but the accounting standards have been announced earlier last year with regards to changes that are pending. So with regards to that, we're helping our customers with this change in accounting standards, and we're producing management information that they can use for those changes. Quite in depth, we've got some other seminars and conferences that we're running that will explain in detail the changes and what the impact is.
In fact, we can see the details for that conference on the screen right now, and if you do want more advice on lease accounting inputs, just get in touch with Lex Autolease consultants. We'll give you the details at the end of this webinar, so look out for that. Chris, next up, the investment in roads, particularly in the north of the UK, has been widely discussed since the budget announcement as well. Looking to the future, where technology like driverless cars could be a possibility. What's your take on that big picture there?
Well, any investment additional into our roads and transport networks has to be positive. Moving goods and people around the country efficiently has to be a positive. The interesting thing is we already have a lot of these driverless aids such as lane departure, self-parking cars, variable cruise control. So it's actually more the legislation that's preventing the autonomous vehicles being on our roads now. So I think people will be surprised. I think we'll see automated vehicles, especially on motorways, for instance, coming in sooner than people think. The government's looking at the legislation, they're looking at how they can introduce these technologies. And if it makes our roads safer and it makes them more efficient, it's got to be a good thing.
And the investment in infrastructure is, of course, really important, away from the new technology, just the old technology of going on a road and moving from Manchester to Leeds, perhaps, easily and quickly.
Absolutely, and that's why they are looking at the physical infrastructure of the roads as well, and the health of the roads, because obviously, our roads have got to be fit for the heavy amounts of transport that they take at the moment.
Well, thank you, Chris. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you and get your advice and expertise on this subject. And we hope that that was insightful and gave you the advice you need to understand the impact of the budget 2016. Our question and answer session is coming up next, so please have your questions ready. Tap them in the box in the bottom of the screen, press enter, and we'll hopefully be able to answer them through the next few moments. Hello again and welcome to the Q&A session, and we're joined now by Principal Consultant Ashley Barnett. Welcome, Ashley.
Morning, Penny. Good to
Here
see
to take your questions, and of course do get involved in this section with your questions. Anything you'd like answered by Chris and Ashley, just enter your questions via the web text in the box below this screen and we'll do our best to answer them. So Chris, we've been talking about ultra low emissions. We've had a question in about the opportunities to get ultra low emissions vehicles into fleet. Where do you start?
Yeah. Well, as we said earlier, we've now got over 4,500 ultra-low emission vehicles in our customers' fleets, so there are opportunities there. The key thing is to look at the type of vehicles you need, the type of drive cycles and activities that you're putting them to, and then find the right type of technology. So as an example, if you're working in an urban environment, parcel delivery or local delivery service, a pure electric van could work really well to give you zero emissions in a city centre area.
Ashley, what would your suggestion be
I
in terms of cost as well, of course?
I couldn't agree more. And I think the key words that Chris has sort of referenced is, fit for purpose. It's fit for purpose, and I think again from a customer perspective, is the cost right? Customers' cost will always be key. So suitability and cost, and then running them on the fleet. And as Chris said, 4,500 on the fleet. Customers are already adopting that technology.
Is there any resistance to low emissions vehicles from employees, perhaps not understanding the technology or the overriding strategy from the company itself to reduce emissions?
I think people are always a little bit nervous about change. It's understanding how you'll refuel the vehicles or charge the vehicles, availability of charging infrastructure, will the vehicles be reliable? All those sorts of questions go into the mix, which I think builds a little bit of uncertainty. But we've been operating plug-in vehicles now since early 2011, and the reliability is very good. So I think really it's just a process of people having to look at the new technologies, getting a bit more of an understanding and see how they can work for them. Interestingly, we've just had the Geneva Motor Show, and manufacturers are bringing more and more plug-in vehicles to the market over the next few years. So the opportunities for this technology are going to increase significantly over coming years.
So be an early adopter and get ultra-low emissions into your fleet.
Yes, definitely.
The customer as well drives it, doesn't it? If you're a B2C firm, you're seeing more and more on the motorway, aren't you, of vans and big lorries saying we're low emissions. This is what's our benchmarking now. We're looking to the future. It's all part of the customer-facing offer, isn't it, in terms of marketing?
I think it is. I think from an environmental stance, a lot of customers are key to portray that right image. And I think they in turn, but building those into their policies, building those into the fleets, and encouraging their employees to do the right thing. And I think it's fair to say a lot of employees are wanting to do the right thing and wanting to adopt green technology in their personal life. So again, they're willing to take on board those new vehicles.
Yeah, and those new values. So we've got some more questions coming in from our audience right now for this webinar. Should I look at changing our diesel-only policy?
Absolutely. I think historically, for the last 10 years, diesel has been the fuel of choice for most fleet operators because the tax system has encouraged low CO2 emitting vehicles, which diesel are, and diesel engines have become very, very efficient. But we're now at a stage where these ultra low emission vehicles are coming in. We're getting more efficient plug-in vehicles, petrol vehicles. So in restricting your policy to a single fuel could actually mean you're missing out on cost-saving opportunities and environmental efficiency.
So start looking now at the options for change.
Yeah, we'd always recommend having a bit of a strategy plan, and I think at the moment a 5-year strategy to look at where you're going with your vehicle technologies and your fuel types to make sure you've got the right vehicles in the right applications. It's key to look at that now.
And that's an opportunity, isn't it, for cost saving? It
is, and I think that Chris's point there around it's the right vehicle for the right person and the right organisation. I think that's the key starting point for a lot of customers, thinking about what they need to do, thinking about what the vehicle is going to be used for, and thinking about is it right for the individual, because there are a lot of people who this technology will be correct for.
Okay, now staying with the lower emissions theme, we've had a question in, as a customer, what would be my main worry in regards to the taxation of larger fleets? So will it consider the lower emissions and how will it change? Actually, that's one for you, isn't it?
Yeah, I wouldn't suggest it. The taxation is something that only concerns larger fleets. I think it's something all fleets should be considering.
Okay.
And I think the key thing and the key message from today is around the lowering of CO2s, and we've seen it with a lot of our customer fleets. Last year, new registrations up to August, 114 grams per kilometre. So people are already heading in that direction. I think the days of people driving older, higher CO2 cars from a fleet perspective is diminishing. And I think we'd encourage people to continually review the policy, look at where government is going, and they obviously have given us advance warning of where they're going with writing down allowances, the plans for ultra-low vehicles in 2020 around looking at those lower CO2 categories, and again encouraging people to get those vehicles onto their fleet, because it's definitely the way to go, don't you think, Chris?
Yeah, and it's not just the tax and the fuel costs. We are also in a period now where we've got low emission zones in place, and we've got clear emission zones coming in as well. So you may actually find that the higher emitting older vehicles will actually be prevented from entering certain city centres where air quality is poor, or being charged a high cost to go into those city centres. So, if you're a business and you need access to these urban areas, it may be a case that you need to be at the front of the queue rather than trailing.
So although the question refers to worries, in regards to the taxation with larger fleets and smaller fleets, it's the same principle. Do your customers concern themselves with that primarily? What should customers be thinking about when they are managing and coming up with a strategy for their fleet in general? What are the headlines you'd say to a customer?
I think it's the vehicles being fit for purpose, minimising CO2 emissions, because that's what a lot of the tax is based on, and also considering the impact of your exhaust emissions, so the air quality element of where you are. So it's really making sure that your fleet is fit to carry out its core activity into the future, because we're in a very, very changing environment.
And financially, Ashley?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think the key is it fit for purpose? And then I think from a customer perspective, it's does the cost meet the cost that I'm expecting? And I think those two together would make a really good fleet policy.
And of course your customers aren't the big corporates necessarily. There's a whole range of people out there, aren't there, who come to you for this sort of advice. And the same principles apply, do they?
Yeah, and I'd say anybody from a one vehicle fleet up to thousands and thousands of vehicles, the key to it all is, what is it I need that vehicle for? What is it I need the vehicle for? And how much is it, is it going to cost me to operate? And what are my options? And building a policy and making sure that you've got the right vehicle to meet that.
Okay, well, we've had a question in about running cleaner commercial vehicles. And I think some of what we've said will be in this answer. But what would you say to this viewer who's sent this question in? How do they get cleaner commercial vehicles into their fleet? What can they do about running them?
At the moment, for commercial vehicles, it's probably fair to say there's not quite as much choice as there is in cars.
Yeah, they're not at the Geneva Car Show, are they, being shown off all sparkly and new? So, yeah, it's a tougher gig, isn't it, for this approach? Okay.
And we do have some smaller, sort of light commercial vehicles that are electric, and you can get low emission versions of. But the issue with commercials are the vehicles have to carry a payload, they have to carry out a job. And so it's really looking for the sweet spots where you can put in alternative fuels. But again, over time, we believe that you're going to see more lower emitting commercial vehicles coming into the marketplace. So they're following the same glide path as cars, but I suggest a little bit slower.
You talk about the payload. I mean, is a smaller company looking at a small fleet more able to think in a nuanced way about their approach from the get-go? They know their business, they know what they're doing. Or if a company begins to grow, how do they adapt to that with commercial fleet?
It's always difficult, and obviously for commercial vehicles, they tend to run them for a longer time. So for them, it's a higher risk activity to move away from, if you like, tried and trusted diesel technology. And it's a longer term investment, but we still believe firmly that it's getting the right vehicle and the right technology for the journeys that you're using. And there are some very successful parcel delivery companies within places like London that operate zero emission vehicles, and that's everything from pedal power through to electric vans.
Interesting. We've had a VAT question, obviously. We get away from the low emissions, the ultra low emissions. A question in saying, what do you mean regarding the VAT efficiency on making leased cars more cost effective without the first year writing down allowance? Ashley?
Yeah, so one of the things important with leasing cars is there's the VAT advantage that customers get, the ability to reclaim 50% of the VAT on the rentals is a huge advantage that we tend to find, as opposed to the writing down allowance benefit that people would get on purchasing vehicles, either outright purchased, contract purchased. So we do tend to find that leasing vehicles, in terms of financial benefit, there's also the risk benefit in terms of the leasing company taking ownership of the maintenance risk, residual value risk, and having that sort of outsourced solution that does bring more advantages other than just those financially.
Yeah, and we find that nowadays the funding method takes a slight backseat to the operational benefits that outsourcing provides through leasing.
Has that been a gradual change you've seen over the years?
It's certainly been over a period of time, but now contract hire, so a full operational lease, is by far and away the most popular form of funding within our industry in the UK, and it is because companies are able to pass all the operational day-to-day activity over to the leasing company. So it's bringing in expertise and it's bringing in administrative assistance as well.
And in terms of the budget, was there much change there that people will have to get their heads around immediately? Talk us through that element of things. With the first year writing down allowance.
Yeah, I think, as we said earlier, if you're in good shape, if you've already been considering your CO2 emission levels, and you're on that glide path that we spoke about, I don't think the budget holds too many surprises or fears. I think the call to action is for fleet operators who may have been more lax with regards to targeting low CO2 emission vehicles, where now they've got a window of opportunity where they've got to really start looking at focusing on reducing their CO2, which reduces their tax.
Yeah, and I think Chris's point there around, benchmarking at the 110 grams in April 2018, so it may well be that people still need a vehicle that falls above 110, but making sure that the employer isn't picking up that cost. If there's a cost associated with that type of vehicle, the employee should be possibly picking up the tab for the need for that particular vehicle. But I think there's enough vehicles, and there's a wide range of vehicles already today, before April 2018, are below 110 grams per kilometre, and some really nice vehicles that are out there that people can already choose. So I think it's something that a lot of customers will already be aiming towards, and for even those who aren't on that path already, something that they could quite easily get to, and more than happy to help them along with.
And I think that's an important point. When we're talking about low and ultra low emission vehicles, we're not talking about little two-seater city cars. We have executive cars that fall below 110 grams per kilometre. So it's about choosing the right technology and the right type of car, rather than suddenly deciding that we have to drive a little city car because that's the only thing that's low CO2. So you can build a policy that restricts the CO2 of the vehicles without putting everybody in non-desirable vehicles, for instance.
And that goes back to what you were saying earlier about change, and
yes,
it's communicating that change, isn't it? And actually, it's okay to drive this sort of vehicle. And we've got another question from someone who runs a fleet of vans. Were there any changes announced for vans, which we didn't cover off actually, but the budget? What did the Chancellor say about vans? Yeah,
so small changes in terms of any benefit in kind that's due on vans, which obviously is relevant today, but small changes. I think the key message for vans is around making sure that if people are using them privately, making sure that that's being recorded, making sure they're paying the relevant taxation, and making sure that from a company perspective you're keeping accurate business mileage records. I think it's something that with commercial vehicles is really important. Cars, there's a charge that's relevant to the particular car. I think it's less apparent with commercial vehicles. So making sure that your policy and your record keeping for commercial vehicles is up to date and accurate in case you're asked for that information from a government perspective.
And for smaller businesses looking at fleet or developing fleet, where would you say the best cost savings are to be had? People are very cost conscious, and small businesses especially so. What would your advice be to a smaller business?
I think the key to it all for me is the need. what is the specific need for that vehicle. You know, it may well be that in days gone by it's a larger family style vehicle, carries a lot, not very fuel economical. Does that person still need that? You know, has the route, has the need for that vehicle changed? Is it a different area they're covering? Is it different journeys? You know, have they moved location? And is there a need to maybe come smaller in the size of the vehicle, go for something more fuel economical? And again, I think the key to it is employees are understanding this as well. There's a personal cost involved with running cars, and employees are becoming, you know, quite wise to that. So as well as the employer being aware of the cost, employees are helping drive that agenda as well.
And I think one of the things for small businesses, because obviously a lot of our customers that are large fleet operators, they'll have knowledgeable people within their organisation running the fleet.
Exactly. There's a lot to get your head around as ever for a small business person, isn't there?
Absolutely. For a small business person, they probably don't want to sit down and analyse this sort of level or depth. And I think a key thing for me is if you're a small business, CO2 is directly linked to fuel economy. So to me, if you ignore everything else, the rule of thumb is get the lowest CO2 vehicle that you can that's fit for purpose, because that will reduce your fuel costs and it will reduce your taxation, because most company car tax, NIC, etc., is all based on CO2. So if you think of nothing else, it's the right vehicle with the lowest possible CO2.
For immediate impact.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. Thank you, Chris and Ashley, for all of your expertise. It's been a great discussion, and I'm sure our audience have gleaned so much insight from you both. Thank you so much to you for getting involved and sending in your questions. And of course, if you want more information on the topics discussed today, or to ask a question privately, of course, you can contact our consultants. That's right, isn't it? You'll be happy to get back to people. Details for that are on the screen right now. Well, that's all from us at Lex Autolease. Have a great day.